You know, they might have just heard you say that.
That'd be good.
He said we need a coffee sponsor. He took a big old gulp of his coffee.
Right here, coffee sponsor.
Sponsored by Folgers.
No.
Not really. That's a joke. All right. So we're back with a very interesting, relevant topic today. I came through this because this is part of me that's a new generation. I'm pretty much an old soul for the most part, but new generation wise, I love TikTok. I think TikTok's a great information tool, as long as we get it out of Chinese hands. But I think everything's in Chinese hands pretty much at this point. Probably. So, but I was scrolling through TikTok and there was a video that resurfaced from a year or two ago. It's not it's not a recent video. I'm just going to play the audio of it for you real quick off the TikTok. But it was a talk show host anchor talking about Christian nationalism. So I'm just going to play that audio real quick through the mic because we're not high-techy yet. But we do have new microphones.
Yeah. How do you like the new microphones?
I'm going to have to get closer to him. You're about 13 inches away.
Can you hear me?
Okay, here's the video.
Hear words like Christian nationalism, like the New Apostolic Reformation. These are groups that you should get very schooled on because they have a lot of power in Trump's circle. And the one thing that unites all of them, because there's many different groups orbiting Trump, but the thing that unites them as Christian nationalists, not Christians, by the way, because Christian nationalists is very different, is that they believe that our rights as Americans, as all human beings, don't come from any earthly authority. They don't come from Congress. They don't come from the Supreme Court. They come from God.
Okay, so that was the first video that I came across. I think it was day before yesterday. I scrolled by and the video next, it was this lady making stickers that said separation of church and state, and had a church on one side and the Capitol building on the other side. And there's a wall between it. It said, build a wall between these, making an innuendo to the separation of church and state. So that's what we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about separation of church and state. Okay, so here we go. And make sure you're talking to the mic now. It's almost too fancy for us. But, okay.
Hey, can you guys out there hear me?
Tell him to shut up. I don't want to listen to him get on to me anymore. Okay, so first we're going to start with I did a whole deep dive on this last night in the 30 minutes before I went to sleep.
Okay.
So just what is it? The separation of church and state is a philosophical and jurisprudential concept for defining political distance and the relationship between religious organizations and the state. This philosophical concept is not explicitly in any law in the Constitution. Many people believe that this idea is what inspired the Establishment Clause of the Constitution, what states Congress cannot make laws respecting the establishments of a religion. So that's what it is.
What did you read off of?
This is, the first one's off Wikipedia. I think all this is off Wikipedia. So this isn't something
Well, is the statement separation of church and state in the Constitution?
No. It's also not in a law.
I think religion is only stated one time in the Constitution and maybe even in the amendments to the Constitution.
Yeah.
It's only stated one time.
Yeah.
Where they generally get this, or where they do get this and where it comes from, is the First Amendment, which we generally typically think about that as being the freedom of speech, those things. But there's 16 words at the beginning of the First Amendment, and it states, Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion, that's the first part, comma, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that's where they get the separation of church and state, if I'm not mistaken.
They say that it's a philosophical ideology, and they say it's what inspired the writers of the Constitution to make that clause, the no instituting a religion by Congress clause. Right. And so that's why they came up with it. There's a lot of people, it actually came from 17th century colonial America and Great Britain, because back then we were under Great Britain, and it was a lot of people from back then. I just have a few here. Roger Williams, he was the first founder of Rhode Island. He was the founder of Rhode Island and the first Baptist church in America. That he lived 1603 to 1683. John Locke, he was an English political enthusiast, philosopher. He was 1632 to 1704. And then Thomas Jefferson is in America is like the big one that they show as the starter of that ideology here. Right. So his would be, he's in the 1700s. So, and I have some quotes from him. So Roger Williams said, "The church of the Jews under the Old Testament and the church of the Christians under the New Testament were both separate from this world. When they opened the gap in the hedge or wall of separation between the garden of the church and the wilderness of the world, God always broke down the wall, removed the candlestick, and made his garden a wilderness as at this day. If God ever pleased to restore his garden and paradise again, it must of necessity be particularly walled in from the world unto himself." So he kind of started this ideology. John Locke, his quote was, "The church itself is a thing absolutely separate and distinct from the commonwealth." And then Thomas Jefferson's, his was in a letter to the Danbury Baptist Association, the quote that they get. He mentioned a wall of separation between church and state, believing that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and God, and he owes account to no other for his faith or worship. The legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions. So that was his quote.
So, if I'm understanding you correctly, your explanation of why this is a subject or for debate or anything like that is an ideology.
It's an ideology. The biggest misconception now is that separation of church and state is a law.
Well, and the separation of church and state is in the Constitution.
It's in the Constitution.
And that is the ruling document of the United States, right, or the ruling document of a state. The state has constitutions. The federal government has a constitution, but those are not, that is a ruling document.
Yeah.
And in that ruling document, for the purposes of talking about whether it's a law or whether it is the opinion of the Supreme Court, I have here, we may or may not have time to get into them, but different rulings by the Supreme Court, and they're kind of up in the air. Mm-hmm. There was one in 2022 of Kennedy versus Bremerton School District in 2022 that the the majority, there were three dissenting, and there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. See, it was 6-3 that the guy was praying on the field and didn't require, but invited people to come and pray with him. He was a football coach, and it was 6-3 that he was not going against the Constitution, so that he was not doing something that he shouldn't be doing, and he had to be reinstated because his contract was not renewed the next year.
Right.
So not a law, and there's other ones. Lemon in 1971, Lemon versus Kurtzman, that had a different outcome. Mm-hmm. So it's an opinion, not a law.
Ideology.
The philosophy. Supreme Court makes opinions. They don't make laws. They're not supposed to. Mm-hmm. Opinions we all have opinions. Theirs is one that's looked toward higher than my opinion.
Yeah. But supreme opinion.
Yeah, it's the supreme opinion.
Yes.
But let's just talk about our thoughts as far as, and I'll just lay it out. My thoughts on the separation of church and state. As I read in the First Amendment, when the United States was formed, it was colonies. There was 13 original colonies, and a lot of those colonies were formed on religious reasons. Mm-hmm. They were formed to
further the gospel.
Yeah, but they were also, the Puritans settled in a certain place, which was a colony. The different sects of Christianity.
Yeah. Quakers were Pennsylvania. They had,
correct.
I think Maryland, or one of them had more Catholics, but
right.
Many different Christian
sects. And when they wrote the Constitution, that was mindful that one of those, like the Puritans or the Quakers, would not be the state or the nation's
Official denomination.
official denomination, like they had just come from the Church of England. In England, the Church of England was the official religion. And so that was the forming of the United States. That's what this amendment spoke to.
Right. Well, I have, whenever I research, I like to do who, what, when, where, why, how, everything, just to try to cover all bases. I had down for why was the idea needed. I think my biggest thing was they came from the 13 colonies, who was Britain. And under Britain, you had to be a member of the Church of England. They put out laws, the Recusancy Acts. During the reign of Queen Elizabeth, these laws required English, Welsh, and Irish citizens to attend weekly services and conform to Anglicanism. Those who refused to attend were fined £1 a week. And then the Act of Uniformity in 1662 made the Book of Common Prayer mandatory. The Test Act required anyone in position of trust or public office to be a member of the Church of England, not just a Christian, but a member of the Church of England. So I think coming out of that system where not only did you have to be a certain denomination of Christianity, but you also had to be part of the Church of England, which was headed by the crown, because the head of the Church of England is the monarchy, that it was very important for them as a new nation to be able to enshrine your right to choose how you want to worship God, right? That's why I think it was on their mind, why I think it was needed for them. So I think modern times, thinking about people talking about it nowadays, like the reels I was watching, it's kind of a two-pronged issue. They don't understand what it means. They don't understand what it is. They don't understand that it isn't a law. The second one is that what it means. They don't understand it's not a law, and they don't understand what it means. And from all the quotes that I just read, Thomas Jefferson, John Locke, Roger Williams, they all lean toward it's protecting the state from reaching over power into the church, not from the church exercising their morals and opinion in the state. And I think that was the dangers on their mind, is the government instituting something that they had to do. So
one of the things that this case, Lemon versus Kurtzman, there's actually a statement that, or you know how they call the Lemon Law when it comes to cars and vehicles. There's also a Lemon Law in regards to church and state. And what this thing's morphed into is, the first part is, Congress shall make no laws respecting an establishment of religion. They can't pronounce a certain religion like Catholic. Or, in a religion does not necessarily, I mean, we can go back and forth whether they're talking about Christian or whether they're talking about all religions, but what it says is religion. So that could be Catholic, Christian, could be Muslim, could be Buddhism.
What did the founders think it was, is what my biggest question was whenever I was looking into this.
Right. But if we work off of what they said religion. So let's just work off of that. So they can't, the federal government cannot come in and say, this is the federal religion. If you live in this nation, you will, like in other countries, they have religions, or they have, you don't have the ability to worship other religions. You don't have the freedom of that. So, and the second part of this is, or prohibit the free exercise thereof. And Christian nationalism, you hear that thrown around a lot with this subject. And Christian nationalism, and what they try to impose, is the question of whether you can push your Christian belief or your Muslim belief or your moral compass onto someone else. And it is pretty much I don't know how you separate someone's belief, no matter what their belief is, from the person they are.
Well, in the clip that I played in the beginning, she said, what separates Christian nationalists from just Christians, because she's like, well, not all Christians are like this, but she's like, what separates Christian nationalists from Christians is the fact that they believe that their rights don't come from the state, they don't come from government, they come from God. But that's not Christian nationalism, that's the Declaration of Independence. It has nothing to do with Christian nationalism. Right. I even have the quote down here somewhere. We hold these truths to be self-evident. All men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers for the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it's the right of the people to alter or abolish it and institute new government, laying its foundations on such principles and organizing its powers in such a form as to themselves seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. So and that was James Madison. That was the Constitutional Convention. The same guys I just quoted, Thomas Jefferson, and I have more quotes in here that I want to make sure and get into that are really good. They believed that there was a creator, God, and that he's the one that gives you rights. So that's not the very foundations of what our law was built upon. Declaration, which goes over into the Constitution, is that that our rights come from God, that our moral compass comes from God, that the standard is our Creator. So I just want
so kind of switching gears, but staying on the same topic. Do you think that our government is, because one of the things that the government was not supposed to do was not supposed to fund religion, any kind of religion, Christian or otherwise. Do you think that, do they today?
Do they today?
Do they fund?
We can get to
this goes. I believe that the Constitution does not speak to separation of church and state. I don't know how you can separate one's belief, whatever that belief is, from the person that they are.
Well, I think it does, but I don't think people understand what the separation of church and state is. That's my thing. The separation of church and state was never meant to separate somebody's moral and religious beliefs from the state, but to separate the state from the church. That was the danger of the time. That's what they expressed in these quotes, and that's what they carried out in their lives. There were devout Christians that preached and prayed during the Constitutional Convention. In fact, Benjamin Franklin, during the first few days of the Constitutional Convention, he said, "The longer I live, the more convincing proofs I see of this truth that God governs in the affairs of men. And if a sparrow cannot fall from the ground without his notice, it is probable that an empire cannot rise without his aid. We have been assured in the sacred writings that except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it." Calling for prayer while writing the Constitution. That doesn't sound like somebody who didn't want religious beliefs in the government. And that happened daily during the founding of our country.
Well, that is how you manage the way. The election should be the way that you manage the people that you want to govern.
Oh, yeah.
And if Christians are not wanted, or if they are wanted, you elect those people that have your values, that will represent you with the values.
That's how a democratic republic works.
Right.
I mean,
right.
If you don't like the people, vote them out. But obviously, if they're in there, enough people like them. So, but to answer your question, do I think churches are funded today? Yes, I do think they're funded today in many reasons. The one that comes to mind first is there was one local church around here that I know of, but I know that there's more than one. And this is a whole other tangent we can go off of, but I'm just going to mention it. That was paid to hold a vaccine clinic. To my understanding, that's what happened. By either the state or the federal government, I don't know which one, but they were paid to have a vaccine clinic during COVID. The second one I would say is that many churches, and I have been to churches that are this, and they're very good churches doing good stuff, but it is a thing that you have to look at. are 501c3 incorporated nonprofits, which means that they do have more regulation from the government. They do have that where they don't have to pay taxes, but they do have
That's
more,
a payment.
I mean, it's a payment, but there is more regulation from the government. I think originally churches weren't taxed. Nobody really was, like, a citizens weren't taxed back when the Constitution was founded like we are today.
Foreign entities were taxed.
It was tariffs. So anyway, I think we
love some tariffs.
love tariffs. I think we're in a broken system that makes it hard on churches to operate like they did back in the day, because we can judge them and say, well, back then they did this, but at the same time, if you put a lens on how things are now, it's almost impossible for it to. And you can go many ways with that, but yes, there is ways that churches are funded and controlled by the government.
Right. There's religious entities that are funded by the government. Just like a lot of these women's centers get massive funding from the government.
Yeah.
Which are generally, all that I know of are Christian based. And I'll say straight up front, I'm Christian. I'm against abortion.
Yep.
And I am totally for all those clinics. But not that all homeschool is Christian, but the mass majority of homeschool, and we all get vouchers or are able to get vouchers in many states. And that is funding from the government to fund Christian education, Christian private schools. They get vouchers for private schools, which is money, tax money.
Church schools even.
Church schools, you get vouchers. So, and this is one of the things that we talked about last week, and then I mentioned last week, is that we often, and a lot of Christians think it's great that we get vouchers and all those things, but if you will generally get bit by the hand that feeds you. And so you need to be careful about those things.
Yeah, and we saw it during COVID. The way they were saying people can't meet, you can't have services, you can't celebrate Easter, which is a huge Christian holiday. Their Christmas services couldn't do their Christmas services. Just things that you would never happen if it was, I mean, back in the day, first thing they did whenever everybody had the pandemic broke out is have a prayer meeting. So, I mean, it's different. And I think the biggest reason that it is the way it is today is that the church as a whole has forsaken their duties to the government, what they were supposed to do. Really, if we're talking about all the issues, abortion, adoption, all of these, because Christians are called to care for orphans and widows. If every single Christian was watching out for orphans and widows, I'm not talking about it. Right now we have foster care, and foster care is very, I appreciate the people do that. I think it's the system we have, but say we didn't have it. It's the church's job. If every single person was watching out for orphans and widows, we wouldn't need foster care. We wouldn't need the government to do that. If everybody's watching out for moms struggling, single mothers, we wouldn't have abortions if the church was doing their job. If the church and religious organizations were in charge of pronouncing marriages, we wouldn't have all of the LGBTQIA plus issues we have now. It's only whenever we've forsaken those rights to the state that they became a problem.
Yeah, the state determines what marriage is.
Yeah.
And for insurance reasons, all the other reasons.
Yeah.
And there is a division between church and state, but there is a division, meaning the church doesn't get into the government doesn't get into the church's business, and the church doesn't get into the government's business unless they send someone who has a belief of a certain person is elected in a certain area to represent that group of constituents, that population group.
Right.
And then you can't separate a man's belief or a woman's belief from their person.
Right. Now, and I'll just kind of play the other side of this.
Yes.
And it's something I've thought about trying to answer as well, but your opinion, that people say that there's a danger of, this is kind of a two-part question, of people who are Christian voting for Christian things, getting into power, trying to force Christianity on people, force morality on people. So I guess the question is, can you, and is it good to legislate a religious morality or a religion? Not religion, a religious morality, and is that is it possible for somebody to do that at getting into power?
It is possible, and I will maybe get some blowback on this. A lot of those issues, most all of those issues, are not a government issue. They're not. We can go and say that murder is a Christian value. It's against a lot of murder. We can say that theft is a Christian value, but it's against a lot of thieves. I think when you start making individual Christian-based laws, you're going down a slippery slope, because that can be done in the opposite direction. I am against murder. I'm against theft. I think it's a universal thing that people are against those things, and many other laws that could be Christian-based, but they're also other religion-based as well.
Yeah.
I think the freedom to do what you are convicted and as I feel led by the Holy Spirit to do, you should have the freedom to do that in your sphere of influence, of your family, friends, people that you come in contact. You should be able to express your beliefs and not be hindered by any law.
I think I agree with you. It is a danger that if you do get into office, that if other people get into office that believe opposite than you, and you give the state that much power to legislate morality, they can legislate it in the opposite direction.
Absolutely.
So it is a slippery slope, but also if people don't want those types of people in there, keep voting for the people you want in there. And if you don't want them and don't like what they're doing, vote for somebody else. That's kind of just how the system's set up.
That's how the system's set up. And the thing that is so important is freedom of speech, so that you can state your ideas, so that you can have conversations, so that you can have influence on other people. And that's why freedom of speech is so important. Freedom of speech is important so that you can talk. If we don't have time to go into that, but speech has been more restricted, whether that be social media, the spoken word. I don't know how many times in the last 5 years we've heard about people getting deplatformed for the things they say. And I think all those things should be able to be said, and they get shown by the light of the truth. What is the truth? The light of discussion will shine a light on the flaws of people's speech.
The light of truth. Let's be perfectly clear. The Bible is the truth.
The Word of God is the basis of truth.
If we aren't perfectly clear about, if I'm not perfectly clear about what I believe, the Bible is the truth. No, period, point blank. So I don't have much more on that. I do have these quotes because people are like, well, that another misconception nowadays is that the founders weren't actually Christian. They try to call them something different, but theists or whatever. But I just read earlier something from Benjamin Franklin calling for prayer. He was supposed to be a deist. Does a deist say that? And this is just another instance where they try to paint history in the way that they want it to sound, and it happens all the time. But before I get into these quotes, I want to say that probably everybody's heard is about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech is my right to say what you don't want to hear. Right. And that's a meme that I've seen going around, but it's one of my favorite things. Right. So let me get into these quotes. So this is Thomas Jefferson. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with his wrath? I indeed tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, and that his justice cannot sleep forever. How doesn't that apply today? I mean, they were even talking about it back then. How much more today? James Madison, he was a major writer of the Constitution. Before any man can be considered as a member of a civil society, he must be considered as a subject of the governor of the universe. John Adams, we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to govern any other. Steps on a lot of atheist toes and all. Anyway, that's a powerful one, because that John Adams, he was in the Constitutional Convention. These are the Constitution writers saying that it's inadequate if you're not a believer. It is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God, to obey his will, to be grateful for his benefits, and to humbly implore his protection and favor. That's George Washington. And then there's one I just read about, Benjamin Franklin. And then, whereas it is the duty of nations as well as of men to their own dependence upon the overruling power of God to confess their sins and transgressions in humble sorrow, yet with assured hope that genuine repentance will lead to mercy and pardon, to recognize the sublime truth announced in the Holy Scriptures and proven by all history, that those nations only are blessed whose God is their Lord. And that one was a little bit later. That's Abraham Lincoln. But it was a theme. This belief was a theme all the way up until the modern times, about mid-1900s.
Right.
So,
And in my reading and my understanding of the First Amendment, whatever the theme was, that's what the Constitution says. And that's the document the document says that we have the freedom to believe and worship the way that we want to without the government's interference. And we can't be prohibited from exercising our beliefs.
yep.
That's the bottom line. And I would say that, as Stephen Crowder would say, change our minds. Right in.
Right in.
Yeah.
And that's something we haven't.
What's the email that they can?
Email is facingthefirepodcast@gmail.com, I think. Is that the one, Bryant? facingthefirepodcast@gmail.com. All lowercase, one word. Write us there. You can comment on this video, this podcast.
Especially if you disagree. That's the ones we
We
want.
want to hear from you. We want to be able to respond, or to, if you change our mind, you might be able to change our mind. So that's a call to action for all of y'all. I don't have anything else. Do you have anything else?
It's good.
I hope our audio is fixed. It's been a little bit dicey, but we're getting there. But I hope y'all have a great week, and we will see you next time.